I've already placed and given official notice to the state attorney's office as well as should an indictment come down, Casey will surrender herself.
That seems like a long time ago, and of course the big debate surrounding this trial is whether or not Casey Anthony should get the death penalty if convicted. Now, did you know that in Florida history, in the history of Florida, only one woman has ever been sentenced to death for killing her child? This was in 1992 when Ana Maria Cardona was found guilty and sentenced to death for torturing and killing her 3-year-old toddler by hitting him in the head with a baseball bat. Her conviction was overturned on a technicality. Awesome. She was retried and again found guilty. The jury again recommended death, which was upheld by the judge earlier this month. Now, that's a pretty obvious case. You can contrast that with the Jacksonville case of Alexandria Tobias. Now, last year, Tobias pled guilty to shaking her 3-month-old baby boy to death. It's actually happens more than you might think. It's called the shaken baby syndrome. It's apparently it was because he interrupted her computer game. Nice. Earlier this year, Tobias asked for mercy before sentencing. Take a look at that.
This is a plea about not a plea about pity. I'm asking for mercy. I realize I do deserve consequences, but the death of my son is a life sentence in itself. So could you please consider that I am still young and I have ambition, potential, hopes, and dreams.
It's all of this stuff. This is the saddest material. In this case, the judge showed no mercy, sentencing Tobias to the max, 50 years in prison on a second-degree murder charge. Now with us is Ricardo Enriquez. He's a former juror on the Phil Spector case. We're going to hear what he thinks about the Casey Anthony trial. And rejoining us is defense attorney Mark Eiglarsh. Mark, are these cases an appropriate yardstick for what might happen to Casey?
Well, they have to be used. Listen, we're trying to find justice for her, whatever that means to different people. Aristotle defined justice as like cases being treated alike. So in the death penalty analysis, you have to say, well, how is her case similar to the other cases where women or other people have been put to death? And 2 people have been executed here in Florida since the death penalty laws have been revamped. Both of those women were executed for killing multiple people, not just one. And again, don't kill the messenger. I'm just comparing her to other similarly situated cases.
All right, let's look at the case of 8-year-old Kayla Adams. Now, in 1998, Kayla's dad, Richard, hang on to this one, guys. He beat a child with a board, then punched her so hard he actually ruptured her liver. After that, he stomped her to death and then buried her body in the Ocala National Forest. Did he get the death penalty? No. He's getting 3 meals a day and a roof over his head for the rest of his life. Ricardo, that case is even more brutal than the Casey Anthony case, and yet he did not get the death penalty. As a juror, how do you weigh these things out? How does that work?
It all depends on what the judge, how you're asked.
How you're instructed by the judge?
Right.
So you're able to dispassionately look at facts when a judge says, don't consider anything you've heard, don't consider that this is a death penalty trial. You can just examine the facts.
You try. Obviously, you'd be affected by your own personal life experience.
Yeah.
But you do try to please and to do your job. Please your own self, that you're true to yourself.
All right. Now so you've actually been in this position. Right. You were there in the Phil Spector case. So if you, based on what, have you been watching this case?
Yes, I have.
All right. Based on what you've seen on television, it's different, I'm sure, than sitting in the courtroom.
Absolutely.
What do you make of this? What would this feel like as a juror?
Well, it brings back a lot of feelings. I mean, I sympathize with the jurors, what they're going through.
Which is what?
Which is a lot of bombardment of information, a lot of detail. And basically...
Do they get frustrated with it, tired of it? Yeah.
Absolutely, they do. And sometimes you take notes, sometimes you don't. In our case, a couple of the jurors snoozed off and fell asleep during some of the expert testimony because it was so actually boring.
I like asking this of all my new guests. Do you have a take? So far, based on what you've heard, what's your take on Casey? You're a juror. Pretend you're a juror. What's your take?
I think she did it.
Okay.
I think she did.
Intentionally?
Potentially, and I think it might have been an accident.
So based on what you've heard, could you go for first-degree murder? As a juror? You could. You could. Yes. Okay. All right. Mark, you hear that from a former member of a jury. Right. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. I'm getting Facebook emails from people who think that this might have been an accident, without hearing any evidence of it. It's very important to note that the death penalty, first of all, costs, I'm not an advocate one way or the other, I'm just giving the facts, costs 5 times more to execute someone than to keep them in prison for life, because it takes so much to fund the appeal process. The other thing is 68% of the time when someone's given death, their convictions are reversed. Keep that in mind, too. This is not going to be like, okay, death, and let's take her out back and shoot her. Judge Perry, listen, he has reversed convictions and then death penalties a number of times, one of the times because the prosecutor withheld favorable information from the defense, and that was Jeff Ashton, the prosecutor in this particular case.
Oh, that's interesting. Enrique, Ricardo, I'm sorry, let me ask you another question. When you're sitting there in the jury box and you've got the whole family sitting in the courtroom there, right, does that affect you? Do you think to yourself, I mean, one of the things that I mentioned in the opening of my program was that, you know, there are the parents of the woman who I'm sitting in judgment over. Does that affect me as a juror?
It did. It did. And initially we didn't know who the family members were.
Your case.
Right.
So family was in the court, but they hadn't been identified.
No, we hadn't.
But in this case, they have been because they've been testimony.
Right.
Yeah, they've testified.
Well, you look at the family.
Yeah.
And after we found out the family, we did look at them and kind of had a little, maybe even sympathy for them.
So in this case, again, back to Casey Anthony, does it give you more sympathy for Casey given the agony the grandparents are being dragged through here? Or does it make you angry?
No, it actually gives me sympathy for the family.
Yeah.
For the mom and the dad.
But then would you be able to convict her of a murder, given that that could add the increased stress to the family?
Yes.
You think of that, then? Okay. All right, Mark, last words to you. Any final thoughts on this being a death panel and the possibility of it being a conviction of whether or not Casey did this?
Well, most of the time when someone is given the death penalty, the crime is especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. It's known as hack. The problem in this case is we're all not very crystal clear on how it happened. It's very different than those cases where, you know, torture and horrible facts. You know, I'm not minimizing it, but that's that. And then couple that with George and Cindy, who are going to look at the jurors and plead for their daughter's life, assuming she's convicted, I think ultimately will tip the scales in the factors that weigh against the death penalty.
Well, that's exactly why I wanted to do this little segment, is to point out that the previous cases in Florida where people have been convicted of murder have been just disgusting, just brutal. I mean, not that this isn't a disgusting situation, but as a yardstick, it's different. It's a little different. It's still awful, and it's easy to hate Casey, and it's easy to look at her parenting and her lying and be very angry with her, but it is not somebody stomping somebody to death. Well, maybe, we don't know. That's all. We don't know the cause
one of the lead cases. One of the lead cases in Florida says death is different. It's not for every first-degree murder case. So is this the same as those where death has been doled out? That's for the appellate courts to decide if she's ever convicted.
And then again, that's something that's done after this case is tried, right?
Absolutely, assuming it's not reversed for other reasons. If she ever gets the death penalty, when she's executed. If she's ever convicted and given that, it's going to be a long time before you see death.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ricardo. Next, a member of my jury, and if you want to know why he's been running for a seat in the courthouse, you're going to find out. It's not what you think it is. It's not just to see the trial. He has very personal reasons. There he is right there. We'll talk to him.